The comments made about Diane Abbott by a Tory donor have also shone a light on the Labour Party's treatment of her and other minority MPs. Abbott has drawn those connections herself, writing this in The Independent. The Tories are outrageously racist and sexist, Abbott says, but so are Labour. On Politics Live, co-editor of Tribune magazine, Taj Ali, agreed.
Let's remember what the Ford report actually said. It identified a hierarchy of racism within the Labour Party. We have to remember that the vast majority of black people in this country, Muslim people in this country, engage in party politics through the Labour Party. The Muslim Network report from a few years ago found 1 in 3 British Muslims had experienced Islamophobia within the Labour Party. Black female Labour MPs, Dawn Butler and many others, have repeatedly said that Labour Party does not take anti-black racism seriously. And so she's apologised. I think she was wrong to say what she said, but she has apologised. She's very sincere about that, and she should absolutely be readmitted. And I think the Labour Party is not doing anywhere near enough to tackle this disgusting racism and this disrespect that Diane Abbott was subjected to. Let's remember what the report said. It said that Diane Abbott was found crying in the loos, and you had senior Labour officials taking the mickey out of her. I mean, that's completely unacceptable. She's going back to work the next day and she's working with these people. It's a joke.
Labour actually are trying to have their cake and eat it by, Keir Starmer saying, OK, well, we feel so bad about Diane and what the Tories are doing is terrible. Labour even used the row to try and boost their own funding. They sent a letter out to Labour Party supporters saying that the Tory Party's biggest donor, Frank Hester, has been exposed for making racist comments. We are fuming. 10 million in their election fund from this man. They're not giving it back. We need to cancel it out. Unlike the Tories, our campaigns rely on small donations from thousands of working people. This is all in aid of a woman they refuse to give the whip back to, even though she has said the one thing you could do to protect me is give me back the whip. Ditto, the idea that Labour now relies on small donations from thousands of working people when Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have deliberately moved the funding model so that private donors make up the majority of donations even more than trade unions. It's just bollocks. Sorry, it's just bollocks. So no, Labour are not doing anything to support her really materially. They're speaking about it. They're using it for their own benefit, but they're not actually taking the action that would materially support Diane Abbott. Now, also on the Politics Live panel was Ruth Smith, the former Labour MP who lost her seat to Jonathan Gullis in the 2019 election. Now, this was her response to Taj Ali.
The Ford report has been implemented. The recommendations of the Ford report have been implemented. I am not going to comment on the current, nor should I comment on the current investigation.
No, but what
Diane
about
Abbott.
just generally the treatment? Diane Abbott says she hasn't received an apology for some of the things that Taj has said. Are there issues that need answering, even if you might agree with Claire that that headline is over the top?
I think that there has been a huge change in what the Labour Party was from then to now. We're talking about different leadership, different staff, different everything since since that point. Keir Starmer wasn't leader of the Labour Party, and as you know, my own experiences of the Labour Party at that time weren't exactly brilliant.
No, well, that's obviously, as you say, that was under Jeremy Corbyn's...
This was under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. I mean, I think that's the thing that everyone needs to remember. What came out and those text messages was under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership.
Yeah, it was under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, sent by the people who were trying to kick him out. Those messages, those racist messages, were sent by the people who were trying to undermine him to the point they said they wanted him to lose the election. And they were said about one of his closest political allies and friends. Is Smith trying to suggest that Corbyn is responsible for those messages? Of course, she was a huge anti-Corbyn figure herself at that time. Next up to chat was unaffiliated peer Claire Fox, who wanted to talk about the language of racism rather than racism itself.
I even want to say to you about Islamophobia. You know, you keep saying that word. I mean, anti-Muslim hatred is very different to Islamophobia, which I want the freedom to criticise Islam, to make fun of it.
Have I, on this programme, said you're not allowed to criticise my religion? I'm talking about violence and abuse directed to British Muslims.
But I'm
this
saying,
isn't about terminology. You can criticise religion as much as you like.
I know, good. However, the definitions of Islamophobia would not allow that. And there is a concern that you will bring in blasphemy by the back door. There is my concern. I know, but I should be able to say that. I also think that there is a danger that every time you're talking about one thing, you end up having another racism to contend with. And I do think that does create a competitiveness. And as I've suggested, Diane Abbott was reflecting at that time, it was fashionable to say, and the Jews don't really count in that competitive racism question.
All right.
And that's become fashionable again today, and it's a problem.
Just briefly, in response to what Ruth said, is it better under Keir Starmer's leadership?
Absolutely not. I mean, I myself have experienced Islamophobia within the Labour Party, and British Muslims have repeatedly told me about their own experiences. And so, no, I don't think it's better under Keir Starmer. I think he takes British Muslims for granted.
All right.
I think he does not take seriously racism against black people.
Sorry, I just sat and watched Claire Fox say, I want to do Islamophobia so I can make fun of Islam. And sit there and argue that point to a young Muslim editor who, to Taj's credit, just took that so well, just stayed very calm. Didn't let her speak. He let her speak. He let her speak. And then he said something, comprehensive to Joe Corbyn. And she's like, Joe Corbyn. Her name's not even Joe Corbyn. To the host. And she was just like, all right. There's just no curiosity, no engagement at all with the meat of the matter. And we have these discussions again and again and again on these shows. Now, I've been in them. We go on them and we get asked about these individual incidents all the time. And then when we say, well, it's part of this systemic pattern of dismissal and obstructiveness and disingenuity when it comes to talking about racism and its function. And they're just like, well, is it though? They don't care. They do not care fundamentally about making a change. They care about making content.
It was quite galling to hear Taj specifically say, no, the racism issue is not better under Keir Starmer, especially for people from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. And to hear the host just instantly laugh when someone says that Keir Starmer might not be the perfect coronated PM that he seems to be in terms of our media, how there seems to be scant criticism of Keir Starmer's leadership so far. And hearing somebody outside of that tiny little media bubble talk about racism and the hierarchy of racism within Labour can elicit that kind of reaction. What I will say, though, it is nice that we seem to have stopped this Ford report media blackout in which we don't ever seem to discuss it, or at least we only ever discuss it in very kind of scant terms, when it was allowed, and with Taj on the programme, to be able to very specifically talk about the failures of Labour to actually implement the things that were stated within the report. This was also brought up by Afsana Begum on Newsnight last night, in an interview with Victoria Derbyshire. Good, actually. It wasn't like a debate format. She was just invited on to talk about her own experiences, which I think are a really important microcosm of the problems that we've seen here. This is a woman who has had to undergo huge amounts of new personal abuse, who, whilst had to take time off for her own mental health reasons from the Labour Party, whilst also having to face a trigger ballot within her constituency at that same time, and has had, in her own words, no support from the top of the Labour Party throughout this entire process. If somebody can be a very explicit example of the failure of this current Labour leadership to actually take these instances of Islamophobic and anti-black racism seriously, then she is one of the most highlightable cases, alongside the long-scale street treatment of Diane Abbott that we've seen and was uncovered in the Chakrabarti report and the Ford report so far, and as Taj mentioned in the clip that we saw. It is also quite galling to hear the people who are being criticised then kind of use this as a way to try and soften their own image by trying not talk about the Ford report in the way that it was actually brought to us, by saying, well, actually, we've implemented all the things in their Ford report. So that just shows, actually, we take all the racism things seriously. The big racist party that we had under Labour from 2015 to 2019, when the actual criticisms that we're seeing that haven't properly been implemented from the Ford report were the ones to do specifically with the issue of anti-black and Islamophobic racism. Martin Ford KC himself is on record, as we saw in his interview with Al Jazeera during the Labour files, as saying he believes that there has not been a sufficient response over the issues of the hierarchy of racism that he explicitly detailed within his own report. And he has not even been contacted after that report by anybody from the top of Labour at the time in which the Al Jazeera episode featuring him was recorded. So for them to just kind of brush off these criticisms, everybody on the panel essentially, including the host, to brush off these criticisms, just shows you how the hierarchy of racism is not just specific to the Labour Party, it's within our entire political and media class, and is kind of a given at this point.
I'm so tired. I say this a lot across other things, and I think it's because a lot of people are exhausted. But when you look at the impact that having to constantly engage in these discussions and mentally engage with responding to these incidents which happen again and again and again, and what it does to people of colour in public life, and specifically here, I'm going to talk about Black women. I'm a light-skinned Black woman, so the impact it has on me is much lesser than I see it have on my dark-skinned colleagues. There's two sides to this in which you see racism function to prevent, people like Black women being able to engage in political life in the same way as other demographics are, whether that's, becoming voices in the media or becoming politicians, etc. But there's the other side to it where people start self-selecting because of how wearing it is to see the constant attacks and abuse, and I'll use the word gaslighting, that someone like Diana Abbott or Kate Osamar has to endure just for the crime of being progressive and being Black in public life. Because there is more protection afforded to ethnic minorities who are willing to uphold the status quo, which is the racist hierarchies that we live in. And I'll use an example that I shared on social media earlier, which is I had a friend who, while this is all going on, what producers do is they call us all up. They find every brown person in the phone. They say, hey, can you come on the show and talk about Diane Abbott? And a very big political program called me up and said, can you come on and talk about Diane? And I said, look, okay, I actually think you should pick someone else for this, who was close to the story. And what I meant by that was a dark-skinned Black woman who can speak to this story directly. And I asked a friend, would they be willing to do it? And she said, no, because I don't want monkey emojis in her comments. And she'd actually locked her Twitter that day because she tweeted something about the incident and she'd been hit with a load of racist abuse by all the people on social media who now make lists of Black women and Black people in public life just so they can come and comment on them when they say something that's to do with issues of race. And I'll tell you how that story ended. The political program that had called me up, I found out today that the person they booked in, who was a dark-skinned Black woman and a journalist, they told her they didn't have time to speak to her when it came to her slot.